Hi, good evening. I want to thank you very much for coming this evening. I would like to think that we could share a few moments here and think together. My name is Ken Reed, and of course, I'm here because I was invited as the author of The Art of Falling Back Upon Oneself and the Yoga of Lies, my recent book. Let me get started by saying, it seems that most of us are absorbed in how to best benefit ourselves and hopefully a little bit for others. And for the most part, we're in a state of angst and anxiousness each moment about how to pull that off. I would like to suggest that in spite of wanting this, we seem to do everything we can to prevent the benefit from happening. In The Art of Falling Back Upon Oneself and The Yoga of Lies, my new book, I examine some mechanisms of mind that prevent the full and joyous life that we want. Look, we live on the margins of our power. We're very conscious these days of bodybuilding, fitness, and so on, but relatively little attention is paid to the other parts of our makeup. I suggest that lies we tell ourselves leak off our power capital to the point that we never store enough synchronized power of body, mind, and spirit to realize our full potential. When I say margins, I mean stretched to the margins. And by simplifying our lifestyles and making conscious choices along the way, we can create more space in our lives. But what is it that's taking up that space? I contend that we're occupied trying to preserve the I we think we are, and that the lies we tell ourselves to do that creates a wedge between the sheaths of body, mind, and spirit that's manifesting as us. It impedes the synchronicity of our being, and it robs us of power. In my new book, I wanted to share something about the mechanisms and the apparatus of mind and how something we do prevents that flow of force, that intuitive intelligence from flowing. I always like to start my talks by sharing some quotes that I've been meaningful to me because I want to have us looking at things in a certain way, and these will get us reflecting deeper on our existence as we share this time together this evening. It seems like all of the great quotes we read are in print or in places like Facebook or in books somewhere. But can you imagine someone saying things like this to your face right now? My dear sir, you are quite mistaken about yourself. You are not the person you think yourself to be. That's Nisargadatta Maharaj, the author of I Am That, an Indian guru. Here's another. At the center of your being, you have the answer. You know who you are, and you know what you want. Lao Tzu, about 1400 in China. Here's another. You say you need help. For what? You have everything you need for an extravagant journey that is your life. That's Don Juan through the Castaneda books. But this particular quote jolted my path and helped me ask the right questions. There's a power in the universe which, if we permit it to flow through us, will produce miraculous results. Who said that? That was Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi. And for me, the operative word here that lingered and finally had me ask the right question is permit. Permit it. What did that mean? How to permit it sounded so simple, and yet it remained elusive to me. Crisis brought me to a juncture that stopped me long enough to see my lies. It was a tipping point that made me surrender to the life that was already expressing itself. Let me expand on how I arrived at this juncture. I began my yoga journey in 1967. I was visiting a friend, a close friend. Often his 20-something sister would visit, and she often had this brocade bag that she carried with her. It had a flute in it I could see sticking out, and it was always stuffed full of something. And I finally one day said to her, I said, "What is all that stuff you're lugging around with you every time I see you?" And she laughed, and she reached down inside the bag, and she produced a little booklet. And she said, "Here, this is a good starter book." It was a little booklet that said on the title, How You Can Have a Personal Experience with God. Wow, a personal experience. I don't know that could say that I really had a personal experience. I was brought up as a Christian. My parents dropped my sister and I off at church each Sunday to make sure we got religion. But I remember as a 12-year-old sitting in the balcony listening to the sermon, and like the other boys, making airplanes out of the offering envelopes and selling them off the balcony clandestinely. Getting in a little trouble here and there. But life went on, and from this little booklet, within a year, I was a full practicing yogi. I was living in Los Angeles and Laurel Canyon, and within that year, I was now up every morning at 4 o'clock meditating. I changed my life totally. I was a fruitarian. I was a practicing yogi. I was a finely tuned carbon unit, you could say. And in that time, I was having difficulty. I had a family. I was having difficulty working and keeping up my yoga practice because one seemed to pull on the other. If I was working, I wasn't doing the yoga and so forth. I couldn't seem to keep balance, so I needed a little bit more anchoring. And I said, well, maybe I better take a little bit of this ethereal nature off. So I became a vegetarian yogi for the next years. And so I worked with that. Eventually, within a couple of years, I found myself in India as a monk in an ashram where I studied and practiced. I was still very intensely interested, and I continued that for some time. But in the course of that process of having the blessing and learning deeply how to meditate, I began to notice that something was still missing, that myself and others around me were reaching for something, a something. There was still something missing, even though we were reaching and taught the practices and the prescriptions to get to nirvana, samadhi, whatever you want to call it. And little by little, I became a little disenchanted with that. And in time, I began to look closely at that. I had one deep experience I could share with you, which was while I was there, I was tasked, I was working in the gardens, and that was my karma, my sadhana each day. And this was a moment that I'd like to share with you because it was very meaningful in time to come. Um, one July morning in 100-degree weather, I was working in the rose gardens. I was asked that morning to pull weeds in the garden, and I began to pull the weeds, the little weeds around the roses. There was a beautiful pathway there. But about an hour or so into the pulling the weeds, I suddenly looked back at where I'd been, and I saw these little twigs of weeds still sticking up here and there. They were almost imperceptible. I got most of the weeds, but I didn't get all of the weeds as I was tasked to do. And somehow in that moment, it just froze. That moment just froze for me, and I looked back, and I realized that while I was pulling the weeds, I was busy manufacturing what I was going to say to the garden master if he came and looked and saw the weeds weren't all pulled. And I had manufactured, well, I'm going to get them tomorrow. I'm going to come back and get them in a few minutes. I was inventing all of these things to say. So instead of being present to the moment of pulling the weeds, the moment froze and I could see that I had been absorbed, not present to the moment pulling the weeds, but busy manufacturing a moment that had not come yet. And this would become very significant to me in my meditation because it showed me that I wasn't present. And I began to see that I did this often, and most often, about many things, that I was very busy inventing the future moment, telling a story, inventing a story, and it became eventually what I will call the yoga of lies, a practice of meditation, of observation, of mindfulness that allowed me to observe when I was present and when I wasn't present, when I was projecting myself. onto a future moment that had not happened, or if I was living in a past moment reacting to something that had happened in the past. So instead, really, of the kind of meditation I'd been taught, the kind of meditation that my other ashramites were doing, um, of reaching through mantra, through symbol, through looking for something out there to attain, I began to notice that that was a form of separation. It was a reaching, a seeking for something that was not, I was not yet there. I was not it. I was not present. So in time, this kind of observation unfolded more and more and more. But I was not able really to put that together into any continuous um, moment or life. But it was really a series of events over the next 20 or so years that would intervene. These gaps would come, these interventions through crisis or through survival modes, being faced with death, almost drowning, a number of incidents that I talk about in the book that caused me, in spite of myself, to fall back upon myself, to be in the moment in spite of myself, and to see that I was not continuous. So in time, it just reinforced my form of meditation and gave me the opportunity to learn how to live in the present. This is the beginning of what we will share in the workshops coming up, and I wanted to give you an inkling, an idea of what that was about. And in part two, we'll talk more about the mechanisms of mind and the apparatus and how we drive a wedge between the sheaths of our being, body, mind, and spirit, and causing conflict with these lies, causing conflict between the wedges, and we never have the synchronous power of all three together in one unit, living on the intuitive intelligence that's available to all of us. The benefit that I spoke of, the benefit of the intuitive intelligence is there, it's present in this moment, and it's available to all of us if we can simply observe how we avoid it, how we prevent it. Thank you for coming.